After Abdu'l-Baha had returned from his travels to the West, many Baha'is from all over the world wanted him to come to their countries too. On hearing of this, he remarked, "Oh, my thoughts do not belong to this world and its activities. My thought is diametrically opposed to their thought. They want me to be in their midst, but I long, oh, I so long to be in the kingdom of Abha. There I shall rest. I am waiting for the coming of that auspicious day. Then and now is the time for believers to arise and perform these services. With greater power and concentration of purpose, they must arise to spread the message of the kingdom. From the kingdom of Abha I shall look down upon them and confirm and assist them. No catastrophe must shake their aim. Beest thou assured that I shall confirm them, protect them and watch over them. I shall live in their hearts forever and ever." In some days we will commemorate the 100th anniversary of the passing of the Master. The Universal House of Justice hath written that the observance of this anniversary will undoubtedly prompt individuals and communities alike to contemplate on the significance of that infinitely poignant moment when he who was the mystery of God departed from this world. The 28th of November 1921. The night of Abdu'l-Baha's ascension was a night with no moon, which illustrates the profound darkness that was felt by those who were present at the time of his passing. On 28th November 1921, Abdu'l-Baha woke up at about 1:15 a.m., got up and walked around to a table where he drank some water. He took off an outer night garment saying, "I am too warm." He went back to bed, and when his daughter Ruha Khanum approached, she found him laying peacefully, and as he looked into her face, he asked her to lift the net curtains, saying, "I have difficulty breathing. Give me more air." Some rose water was brought, of which he drank, sitting up in bed to do so without any help. He again lay down and some food was offered him. He remarked in a clear and distinct voice, "You wish me to take some food, and I am going." He gave them a beautiful look. His face was so calm, his expression so serene. They thought him asleep. He had gone from the gaze of his loved ones. The eyes that had always looked out with loving kindness upon humanity, whether friends or foes, were now closed. The hands that had ever been stretched forth to give alms to the poor and the needy, the halt and the maimed, the blind, the orphan, and the widow, had now finished their labor. The feet that with untiring zeal had gone upon the ceaseless errands of the Lord of Compassion were now at rest. The lips that had so eloquently championed the cause of the suffering sons of men were now hushed into silence. The heart that had so powerfully throbbed with wondrous love for the children of God was now stilled. His glorious spirit had passed from the life of earth, from the persecutions of the enemies of righteousness, from the storm and stresses of well-nigh 80 years of indefatigable toil for the good of others. His long martyrdom was ended. After the passing of Abdu'l-Baha, his loved ones realized that the Master knew the day and the hour when, his mission on earth being finished, he would return to the shelter of heaven. He was, however, careful that his family should not have any premonition of the coming sorrow. It seems as though their eyes were veiled by him, with his ever-loving consideration for his dear ones, that they should not see the significance of certain dreams and other signs of the culminating event. This, they now realized, was his thought for them, in order that their strength may be preserved to face the great ordeal when it should arrive, that they should not be devitalized by anguish of mind in its anticipation. Out of the many signs of the approach of the hour when he could say of his work on earth, "It is finished," the following two dreams seem remarkable. Less than 8 weeks before his passing, the master related to his family, "I seem to be standing within a great mosque, in the innermost shrine facing the Qibla, in the place of the Imam himself. I became aware that a large number of people were flocking into the mosque, more and yet more crowded in, taking their places in rows behind me, until there was a vast multitude. As I stood, I raised loudly the call to prayer. Suddenly the thought came to me to go forth from the mosque. When I found myself outside, I said within myself, 'For what reason came I forth, not having led the prayer? But it matters not. Now that I have uttered the call to prayer, the vast multitude will of themselves chant the prayer.'" When the master had passed away, his family pondered over this dream and interpreted it thus. He had called that same vast multitude, all peoples, all religions, all races, all nations, and all kingdoms, to unity and peace, to universal love and brotherhood, and having called them, he returned to God the Beloved, at whose command he had raised the majestic call, had given the divine message. This same multitude, the peoples, the religions, races, nations, and kingdoms, would continue the work to which Abdu'l-Baha had called them, and would of themselves press forward to its accomplishment. A few weeks after the preceding dream, the master came in from the solitary room in the garden, which he had occupied of late, and said, "I dreamed a dream, and behold, the Blessed Beauty came and said unto me, 'Destroy this room.' The family, who had been wishing that he would come and sleep in the house, not being happy that he should be alone at night, exclaimed, 'Yes, master, we think your dream means that you should leave that room and come into the house.' When he heard this from us, he smiled meaningly, as though not agreeing with our interpretation. Afterwards we understood that by the room was meant the temple of his body. A month before his last hour, a Turkish Baha'i, who was a guest at the house, received a telegram telling him of the sudden death of his brother. Abdu'l-Baha, speaking words of comfort to him, whispered, "Sorrow not, for he is only transferred from this plane to a higher one. I too shall soon be transferred, for my days are numbered." Then patting him gently on the shoulder, he looked him in the face and said, "And it will be in the days that are shortly to come." In the same week, he revealed a tablet to America, in which is the following prayer. Ya Baha'u'llah, I have renounced the world and the people thereof, and am heartbroken and sorely afflicted because of the unfaithful. In the cage of this world I flutter even as a frightened bird, and yearn every day to take my flight into thy kingdom. Ya Baha'u'llah, make me to drink the cup of sacrifice and set me free. Relieve me from these woes and trials, from these afflictions and troubles. Thou art he that aideth, that succoureth, that protecteth, that stretcheth forth the hand of help. His good and faithful servant Ismail Aqa relates the following. Sometime about 20 days before my master passed away, I was near the garden when I heard him summon an old believer saying, "Come with me that we may admire together the beauty of the garden. Behold what the spirit of devotion is able to achieve." This flourishing place was a few years ago but a heap of stones, and now it is verdant with foliage and flowers. My desire is that after I am gone, the loved ones may all arise to serve the divine cause, and, please God, so it shall be. Ere long, men will arise who shall bring life to the world. A few days after this, he said, "I am so fatigued. The hour is come when I must leave everything and take my flight. I am too weary to walk." Then he said, "It was during the closing days of the Blessed Beauty, when I was engaged in gathering together his papers, which were strewn over the sofa in his writing chamber at Bahji, that he turned to me and said, 'It is of no use to gather them. I must leave them and flee away. I also have finished my work and can do nothing more. Therefore must I leave it and take my departure.'" 3 days before his ascension, whilst seated in the garden, he called me and said, "I am sick with fatigue. Bring 2 of your oranges for me, that I may eat them for your sake." This I did, and he, having eaten them, turned to me and said, "Have you any of your sweet lemons?" He bade me fetch a few. Whilst I was plucking them, he came over to the tree, saying, "Nay, but I must gather them with my own hands." Having eaten the fruit, he turned to me and asked, "Do you desire anything more?" Then with a pathetic gesture of his hands, he touchingly, emphatically, and deliberately said, "Now it is finished. It is finished." These significant words penetrated my very soul. I felt each time he uttered them as if a knife was struck into my heart. I understood his meaning, but never dreamed his end was so nigh. It was Ismail Agha, who had been the master's gardener for well nigh 30 years, who in the first week after his bereavement, driven by hopeless grief, quietly disposed of all his belongings, made his will, went to the master's sister and craved her pardon for any misdeeds he had committed. He then delivered the key of the garden to a trusted servant of the household, and taking with him means whereby to end his life at his beloved master's tomb, walked up the mountain to that sacred place, 3 times circled around it, and would have succeeded in taking his life had it not been for the opportune arrival of a friend, who reached him in time to prevent the accomplishment of his tragic intention. There was another favored and trusted servant in the master's household. Many years ago, when the master was still a prisoner in Akka, Jamal Effendi had either taken with him or had previously sent a boy, who may have been from India or Burma, to Palestine. Abdu'l-Baha had educated this boy and brought him up with his own family. This boy served as the most faithful servant, and his name was Khusraw. On the last Friday morning of his stay on earth, Abdu'l-Baha said to his daughters, "The wedding of Khusraw must take place today. If you are too much occupied, I myself will make the necessary preparations, for it must take place this day." Abdu'l-Baha attended the noonday prayer at the mosque. When he came out, he found the poor waiting for alms, which it was his custom to give every Friday. This day, as usual, he stood, in spite of a very great fatigue, whilst he gave a coin to everyone with his own hands. After lunch, he dictated some tablets, his last ones, to Ruhi Effendi. Later in the evening of Friday, he blessed the bride and bridegroom who had just been married. He spoke impressively to them. "Khusraw," he said, "you have spent your childhood and youth in service of this house, and it is my hope that you will grow old under the same roof, ever and always serving God." It was as if he was ensuring that Khusraw, his trusted servant, would not be alone after his passing. It seems that a few weeks before Abdu'l-Baha passed away, suddenly he came into the room where Shoghi Effendi's father was and said, "Cable Shoghi Effendi to return at once." His mother consulted with family members, and it was decided that to cable risked shocking Shoghi Effendi unnecessarily, and so they should write to him the master's instructions. The letter arrived after he had ascended. She said, as the master had been perfectly well, they had never dreamed he was going to pass away. There were 6 Western believers in Haifa during the week of the ascension of Abdu'l-Baha. Mr. Curtis Kelsey, who was from New York, was in Haifa to install electric power plants to light the shrines of the Bab and Baha'u'llah. Many years ago, Roy Wilhelm, a Baha'i in New York, had read a tablet from the Master which referred to the Bab's sufferings when he was denied even a candle. Roy cabled the Master asking if he could send a lighting plant to illumine the shrine of the Bab at night. Abdu'l-Baha replied asking Roy to send 3. Roy suggested to Abdu'l-Baha that Curtis install the equipment, and a cable returned stating, "Curtis Kelsey permitted." Curtis immediately sold his car and a few other belongings he owned and made travel arrangements. Once he reached Haifa, the Master asked Curtis to alternate his work between Haifa and Akka, working for 2 weeks at a time in each place, thereby ensuring that the work would be completed at the same time and that the shrines could be lit simultaneously. Before the completion of this work, Abdu'l-Baha passed away. Curtis's love for the Master fueled him to work even harder, and very soon he finished the work. Soon the 2 shrines were simultaneously illumined. A couple from the West, Mr. John Bosch and Dr. Louis Bosch, had arrived in Haifa just 14 days before the passing of Abdu'l-Baha. Dr. Louis was a homeopathic doctor. She had met Abdu'l-Baha in Montreal during his travels to the United States and had given him a homeopathic medicine for cold. When she arrived, she saw Abdu'l-Baha again had a cold. She begged him to take a new medicine which she had with her. He took the medicine and surely it did help his cold, and for several days he was better. Another couple, Dr. and Mrs. Krug, arrived only 9 days before his departure. After their arrival, Abdu'l-Baha asked them to follow him, led the way out of the house up the street to the gate of his own residence, into his garden, and up a flight of outside stairs into the room over the garage. He turned, smiled and said, "Now I am going to give to you, Dr. Krug, my room." Mrs. Krug burst into tears. His grandson Ruhi Afnan tried to comfort her by saying, "The family are all very happy, Mrs. Krug, that the Master has decided to move back into the big house, as we were anxious about his sleeping out here alone." Joanna Hoff was one of the first German Baha'is to visit Abdu'l-Baha in Haifa, and one of the youngest too. She had arrived in Haifa with the Bosch family on 14th November. Joanna recalls that one evening, when she sat quietly at her table, her heart was filled with questions she wanted to ask Abdu'l-Baha. She reported that the Master looked knowingly at her with his penetrating blue eyes and asked her to speak her thoughts. She said, "My thoughts are in Germany, and the question of how, as a poor creature, can I do justice to this holy cause?" She said that to her surprise, Abdu'l-Baha replied that he too had been thinking about this, and that he said, "I wish that you learn Arabic and Persian well, so that you can translate the holy scriptures of Baha'u'llah into your mother tongue. This is my personal wish for you, and since the time is very precious, a teacher will be selected for you here in Haifa, so that you can get your first Persian course right away." Joanna Hoff spent the whole year of her life studying Persian and Arabic, and she understood that the splendors of their inner meaning could best be translated if she herself was constantly engaged in service to the cause. Joanna translated many of the sacred writings with the permission and guidance of Shoghi Effendi and later the Universal House of Justice. A few days before his ascension, it was seen that the physical appearance of Abdu'l-Baha showed signs of weariness. Some of the believers thought that this was due to the small amount of food which Abdu'l-Baha ate. He always divided the food among the guests, a symbol of the way in which he distributed spiritual sustenance. He took almost nothing himself but a glass of milk or the yolk of an egg. So a group of Baha'is went to Abdu'l-Baha. They had a spokesperson, an old Baha'i who was supposed to speak. Overcome with emotion at the question which he was about to present, he could not speak a word. Abdu'l-Baha took him by the hand and encouraged him. This old man said, "The believers feel that there are two reasons for Abdu'l-Baha's weariness. First, he does not eat enough. Secondly, he works too hard." Then Abdu'l-Baha, very humbly, told him that he was mistaken. "Do you think," he said, "that this material food has any effect upon my body? This food has no effect, only good news from the believers, the glad tidings which comes from all parts of the world of the advancement of the cause, of the unity of the believers. This only improves my health. As to the second question, I am going to take a long journey, and at that time my spirit will rest." Many believers believe that Abdu'l-Baha was planning to take a very long journey again. Remember, whether or not I be on earth, my presence will always be with you. Regard not the person of Abdu'l-Baha, he thus counseled his friends in one of his last tablets, for he will eventually take his leave of you all. Nay, fix your gaze on the word of God. The loved ones of God must arise with such steadfastness that should, in one moment, hundreds of souls, even as Abdu'l-Baha himself, be made a target for the darts of woe, nothing whatsoever shall affect or lessen their service to the cause of God. In the morning of Saturday, November 26th, Abdu'l-Baha arose early, came to the tea room and had some tea. He asked for the fur-lined coat which had belonged to Baha'u'llah. He often put on this coat when he was cold or did not feel well. He so loved it. He then withdrew to his room, lay down on his bed and said, "Cover me up, I am very cold. Last night I did not sleep well, I felt cold. This is serious. It is the beginning." After more blankets had been put on, he asked for the fur coat he had taken off to be placed over him. That day he was rather feverish. In the evening his temperature rose still higher, but during the night the fever left him. After midnight he asked for some tea. On Sunday morning, November the 27th, he said, "I am quite well and will get up as usual and have tea with you in the tea room." After he had dressed, he was persuaded to remain on the sofa in his room. In the afternoon, he sent all the friends up to the tomb of the Bab, where on the occasion of the anniversary of the declaration of the covenant, a feast was being held, offered by a Parsi pilgrim who had lately arrived from India. At 4 in the afternoon, being on the sofa in his room, he said, "Ask my sister and all the family to come and have tea with me." After tea, the Mufti of Haifa and the head of the municipality with another visitor were received by him. They remained about an hour. He spoke to them about Baha'u'llah, related to them his second dream, showed them extraordinary kindness and even more than his usual courtesy. He then bade them farewell, walking with them to the outer door, in spite of their pleading that he should remain resting on his sofa. He then received a visit from the head of the police, an Englishman, who too had his share of the master's gracious kindness. To him he gave some silk hand-woven Persian handkerchiefs, which he very greatly appreciated. His 4 sons-in-law and Ruhi Effendi came to him after returning from the gathering on the mountain. They said to him, "The giver of the feasts was unhappy because you were not there." He said unto them, "But I was there. Though my body was absent, my spirit was there in your midst. I was present with the friends at the tomb. The friends must not attach any importance to the absence of my body. In spirit I am, and shall always be with the friends, even though I be far away, The same evening he asked about the health of every member of the household, of the pilgrims and of the friends of Haifa. Very good, he said when told that none were ill. This was his very last utterance concerning his friends. At 8 in the evening he retired to bed, after taking a little nourishment, saying, "I am quite well." He told all the family to go to bed and rest. 2 of his daughters, however, stayed with him. He passed away that night. Dr. Krug recalls that on the morning of November 28, 1921, between the hour of 1 and 1:30 a.m., he was hastily summoned to the bedside of Abdu'l-Baha. Arriving there a few minutes afterwards, he saw at once that the physical condition of the beloved master was hopeless. No pulse could be felt, no sound of heartbeats could be heard. Mrs. Krug recalls, "About 1:15 o'clock, we were awakened by screams from the master's house. 'Come, Dr. Krug, the master, the master.' Like a flash, the doctor was up, dressed, and out of the room across the garden into the house. I stood absolutely petrified with fear. Finally, I was able to slip a one-piece dress over my night robe and rushed after the doctor. Friends, how can I describe that scene in the master's bedroom? I ran to his bedside, and there he lay in the majesty of death. His lovely eyes were still open, but the light of love and understanding that had for so many years cheered the souls of men was gone. My first thought was, my adored one is freed from our endless questions, freed from his life of servitude and heartaches. I turned and knelt at the feet of his sister, the greatest holy leaf, put my head in her lap, and in that agonized moment she stroked my head and tried to comfort me." Dr. Louis Bosch recalls that when she came into the room, it was just as if Abdu'l-Baha were sleeping. His eyes were closed, but otherwise he looked alive. She was told that Abdu'l-Baha was only unconscious. She suggested to give a hypodermic, to which Dr. Krug replied that it was quite useless, that the heart had stopped beating, and that the hypodermic would not enter the bloodstream. It would have no effect. He declared that Abdu'l-Baha had ascended. She recalls that one other thing that she noticed was that the head of Abdu'l-Baha was in a very uncomfortable looking position. She asked Ruha Khanum, the daughter of Abdu'l-Baha, if she could adjust Abdu'l-Baha's head in a better position. She said yes. She stood at the back of the bed, and while she gently moved his head, she felt the bodily warmth of his head, his face and neck. And then Ruha Khanum said to someone, as she held his head, to remove an extra pillow that had been slipped under. Someone slipped away the pillow, and this gave Dr. Bosch the wonderful privilege of holding his head just one moment longer. A soft sheet was spread over the face of Abdu'l-Baha. Thus he became covered from everyone's sight, and the mosquito netting was let down. It was then that all the believers broke out in bitter weeping. The greatest holy leaf was the calmest. For hours after the ascension, the house was crowded with guests. There were at least 40 women with their babies on the floor in the large hall of the master's house. Mr. Curtis Kelsey recalls that an hour later, the greatest holy leaf walked up to him and requested him to take Fujita and Khusrau to Akka, to tell the friends there of the master's passing, and then to come right back. It was about 2:30 in the morning when they piled into the master's Ford, with Curtis in the driver's seat, Fujita besides him and Khusrau in the back. Tears welled up in Curtis's eyes as he thought of Abdu'l-Baha and his experiences with him during the past 2 months. And he began to cry openly when he thought of what a shock the Master's passing would be to the friends across the world. Though Curtis was weeping, he kept driving. He couldn't stop, for the greatest holy leaf wanted the believers in Akka to know about the passing of the Master. Curtis began to pray for strength. Early on Monday morning, November the 28th, the news of this sudden calamity had spread over the city, causing an unprecedented stir and tumult, and filling all hearts with unutterable grief. There were at least 200 women in the garden and on the steps of the Master's house, wailing as news of his passing spread like wildfire. A special announcement was issued in the morning, giving the public the news of his passing and of the funeral arrangements for the following day. We all belong unto God, and unto Him do we all return. The Islamic Association announces with much regret the passing of the highly learned, greatly erudite, generous benefactor, His Eminence Abdu'l-Baha Abbas. His bier will be carried from his home tomorrow, Thursday at 9 o'clock in the morning. You are requested to accept this announcement as a special invitation to assemble for his funeral procession. May God immerse him in His boundless mercy and grant solace unto his family and his people. The family searched for Abdu'l-Baha's papers to see if by chance he had left any instruction as to where he should be buried. They discovered his will, which consists of 3 wills written at different times and forming one document, addressed to Shoghi Effendi. Finding no instructions for the burial, they decided to entomb him in the center of the 3 rooms adjacent to the inner shrine of the Bab. A Baha'i described how on the afternoon after the ascension, the Blessed Family gathered to prepare the Master's body for burial. The Holy Mother, the 4 daughters and their husbands, Mirza Badi Bushir and Lotfullah, were present. Mirza Badi chanted prayers during the entire ceremony, lasting 2 hours, which consisted of washing and bathing and enveloping the body, first with clothing, then they wrapped the Master in 5 separate folds of white silk. Upon the Master's head they placed the high Taj, given to him by Baha'u'llah. Late in the afternoon, the friends were permitted to look upon the countenance of Abdu'l-Baha once more. Mrs. Bosch recalls the beautiful face and the contour of his lovely form, which was lying there shrouded in white silk. She could perceive the fragrance of attar of roses, the majesty of his peace, the silence of his spirit forbade her to gaze long upon him. Neither in death nor in life could one sufficiently feast one's look upon him, upon his indescribable beauty and grace. A coffin was expeditiously obtained, and John Bosch assisted the son-in-laws of Abdu'l-Baha to place his body in the coffin. When carrying Abdu'l-Baha, John remembered how years ago in New York, when the Baha'is wanted to give Abdu'l-Baha a tour of New York, during a drive, Abdu'l-Baha had put his head on John's left shoulder and gone to sleep. Mr. Curtis recalls that he took a picture of Abdu'l-Baha when he lay. A town photographer also took a photo, and while he was looking at his plate to see if it was good, it dropped out of his hand and broke in a number of pieces, rendering it unusable. Now only Curtis had 2 negatives, and many days later when Shoghi Effendi came back, he asked Curtis to come over to see him. Curtis asked Shoghi Effendi if he wanted to see the photos. Shoghi Effendi said no, he would prefer not to see them, and he said that he wished Curtis would destroy them. Curtis did destroy them. Whilst yet the gloom of their bereavement was hanging darkly over the disconsolate ladies of the household, the granddaughter of the master, had a wondrous dream of him. He was speaking with his beloved sister, the greatest holy leaf, in the very room where, in the early hours of the day, it was the custom of the ladies to assemble in his presence, chanting the morning prayers, and to take their morning tea. He turned to her and said, "Wherefore are you all perturbed? Why lament and be sorrowful? With you all I am well pleased. For a long time I have desired to join my father, the Blessed Beauty. I was ever beseeching him to take me to his rose garden above. And now that my prayer is granted, how happy, how joyous, how rested am I. Therefore, grieve not." Tuesday morning, before 9 o'clock, crowds assembled for the funeral. Thousands of people. The day was cloudless. The casket containing the holy body of Abdu'l-Baha was placed before the house. The air was rent with the weeping of family and friends. The next morning, Tuesday, November the 29th, the funeral took place. A funeral the like of which Haifa, nay Palestine itself, had surely never seen. So deep was the feeling that brought so many thousands of mourners together, representatives of many religions, races and tongues. The High Commissioner of Palestine, Sir Herbert Samuel, the Governor of Jerusalem, the Governor of Phoenicia, the chief officials of the government, the consuls of various countries, resident of Haifa, the heads of various religious communities, the notables of Palestine, Jews, Christians, Muslims, Druzes, Egyptians, Greeks, Turks, Kurds, and a host of his American, European, and native friends, men, women, children, both of high and low degree, all, about 10,000 in number, mourning the loss of their beloved one. This impressive triumphal procession was headed by a guard of honor, consisting of a city constabulary force, followed by Boy Scouts of the Muslim and Christian communities, holding aloft their banners, a company of Muslim choristers chanting their verses from the Quran, the chiefs of the Muslim community, headed by the Mufti, a number of Christian priests, Latin, Greek, and Anglican, all preceding the sacred coffin, upraised on the shoulders of his loved ones. Immediately behind it came the members of his family. Next to them walked the British High Commissioner, the Governor of Jerusalem, and the Governor of Phoenicia. After them came the consuls and the notables of the land, followed by the vast multitude of those who reverenced and loved him. On this day, there was no cloud in the sky, nor any sound in the town and the surrounding country through which they went, save only the soft, slow, rhythmic chanting of Islam in the call to prayer, or the convulsed sobbing moan of those helpless ones, bewailing the loss of their one friend, who had protected them in all their difficulties and sorrows, whose generous bounties had saved them and their little ones from starvation through the terrible years of the Great Woe. "O God, my God," the people wailed with one accord, "our Father has left us, our Father has left us." Oh, the wonder of that great throng, peoples of every religion and race and color, united in heart through the manifestation of servitude in the lifelong work of Abdu'l-Baha. As they slowly wended their way up Mount Carmel, the vineyard of God, the casket appeared in the distance to be borne aloft by invisible hands. So high above the heads of the people was it carried. After 2 hours walking, they reached the garden of the tomb of the Bab. Notwithstanding the uphill climb, None showed any signs of fatigue until they arrived at the tomb of the Bab. Tenderly was the sacred coffin placed close to the eastern entrance of the shrine, upon a plain table covered with fair white linen cloth. As the vast concourse pressed round the tabernacle of his body, waiting to be laid in its resting place, within the vault next to that of the Bab, representatives of various denominations, Muslims, Christians, and Jews, all hearts being ablaze with fervent love of Abdu'l-Baha, some on the impulse of the moment, others prepared, raised their voices in eulogy and regret, paying their last homage of farewell to their loved one. So united were they in their acclamation of him as the wise educator and reconciler of the human race in his perplexed and sorrowful age, that there seemed to be nothing left for the Baha'is to say. A Muslim voicing the sentiments of his co-religionists spoke as follows: "Shed no tears for the one that had departed the world of eternity, but weep over the passing of virtue and wisdom, of knowledge and generosity. Lament for yourselves, for yours is the loss, whilst he, your lost one, is but a revered wayfarer, stepping from your mortal world into the everlasting home." A Christian came forward and thus spoke: "He hath lived for well nigh 80 years the life of the messengers and apostles of God. He hath educated the souls of men, hath been benevolent unto them, hath led them to the way of truth. Thus he raised his people to the pinnacle of glory, and great shall be his reward from God, the reward of the righteous. Hear me, O people, Abbas is not dead, neither hath the light of Baha been extinguished. Nay, nay, this light shall shine with everlasting splendor." 9 speakers concluded. The High Commissioner drew close to the casket, and with bowed head fronting the shrine, paid his last homage of farewell to Abdu'l-Baha. The other officials of the government followed his example. The coffin was then removed to one of the chambers of the shrine, and there lowered, sadly and reverently, into its resting place, in which were laid the remains of the Bab. One of the faithful servants of Abdu'l-Baha in Haifa was Agha Rahmatullah Najaf Abadi. Many times he had gone up the stairs of Mount Carmel with Abdu'l-Baha. On one of the occasions when he was accompanying Abdu'l-Baha, as they reached the middle of the mountain, he saw Abdu'l-Baha's sacred face change colorfully, and the heartbeat increased rapidly. Rahmatullah knew that the master wanted to climb up to the mountain peak, and so he suggested that Abdu'l-Baha give him the honor of carrying him on his back. Abdu'l-Baha said, "Agha Rahmatullah, the day will come when you will take me on your back." Then he rested for a short period of time, and they continued climbing the mountain. Then on the day of the passing of Abdu'l-Baha, he was told, "The sacred body must be in the mortuary tomorrow, and no one except you has the strength to carry the sacred body on his shoulder. Go down the stairs and deposit it in the mortuary." Rahmatullah immediately accepted. He took the body gently and putting it on his shoulders went down those stairs. In the middle he remembered that promise, "Agha Rahmatullah, the day will come when you will take me on your back." And oh, he wept. In the first 7 days also, 50 to 100 people were fed daily at the master's house, in the very place where it had been a custom for him to give alms to them. On the 7th day after the passing of the master, corn was distributed in his name to about 1,000 poor of Haifa, to whom he had always been a friend and a protector. The address of Major Tudor Pole in London was often used as a distinguishing point for the cables and letters to the Baha'is. Shoghi Effendi himself, whenever he went up to London, usually called there. On 29th November 1921, At 9:30 in the morning, the following cable reached that office. His Holiness Abdu'l-Baha ascended Abha Kingdom. Inform friends. Greatest Holy Leaf. In notes he made of this terrible event and its immediate repercussions, Tudor Pole records that he immediately notified the friends by wire, telephone and letter. I believe he must have telephoned Shoghi Effendi, asking him to come at once to his office, but not conveying to him, at that distance, a piece of news which he well knew might prove too much of a shock. However this may be, at about noon Shoghi Effendi reached London, went to 61 St. James Street, and was shown into a private office. Tudor Pole was not in the room at the moment, but as Shoghi Effendi stood there, his eye was caught by the name of Abdu'l-Baha on the open cablegram lying on the desk, and he read it. When Tudor Pole entered the room a moment later, he found Shoghi Effendi in a state of collapse, dazed and bewildered by this catastrophic news. He was taken to the home of Miss Grand, one of the London believers, and put to a bed there for a few days. Shoghi Effendi's sister, Rohangi's, was studying in London, and she, Lady Bloomfield, and others did all they could to comfort the heart-stricken youth. So, you see that this man, who was 24 years old, and who had what we could call such an eager heart, so full of purity, enthusiasm, innocence, humility, and love for Abdu'l-Baha, this pure heart of the guardian, received the first and most terrible blow through hearing of the ascension of Abdu'l-Baha. Shoghi Effendi to Dr. Esselmont. The terrible news has for some days so overwhelmed my body, my mind, and my soul, that I was laid for a couple of days in bed, almost senseless, absent-minded, and greatly agitated. Gradually his power revived me, and breathed in me a confidence that I hope will henceforth guide me and inspire me in my humble work of service. The day had to come, but how sudden and unexpected. The fact, however, that his cause has created so many and such beautiful souls all over the world is a sure guarantee that it will live and prosper and ere long will compass the world. I am immediately starting for Haifa to receive the instructions he has left, and have now made a supreme determination to dedicate my life to his service, and by his aid to carry out his instructions all the days of my life. The friends have insisted on my spending a day or two of rest in this place with Dr. Esselmont after the shock I've sustained, and tomorrow I shall start back to London and thence to the Holy Land. The stir which is now aroused in the Baha'i community is an impetus to this cause, and will awaken every faithful soul to shoulder the responsibility which the Master has now placed upon every one of us. The Holy Land will remain the focal center of the Baha'i world. A new era will now come upon it. The Master in his great vision has consolidated his work, and his spirit assures me that its result will soon be made manifest. I am starting with Lady Bloomfield for Haifa, and if we are delayed in London for our passage, I shall then come and see you and tell you how marvelously the Master has designed his work after him, and what remarkable utterances he has pronounced with regard to the future of the cause. With prayer and faith in his cause, I am your well-wisher in his service, Shoghi. Owing to passport difficulties, Shoghi Effendi cabled Haifa. He could not arrive until the end of the month. He sailed from England on 16th December, accompanied by Lady Bloomfield and Rohangi's, and arrived in Haifa by train at 5:20 p.m. on the 29th of December from Egypt, where his boat from England had docked. Many friends went to the station to bring him home. It is reported that he was so overcome on his arrival that he had to be assisted up the steps. awaiting him in the house was the only person who could in any measure assuage his suffering, his beloved great aunt, the sister of Abdu'l-Baha. It now became the painful duty of Shoghi Effendi to hear what was in the will and testament of Abdu'l-Baha. A few days after his arrival, they read it to him. Ruhiya Khanum recalls, "In order to understand even a little of the effect this had on him, we must remember that he himself stated on more than one occasion, not only to me, but to others who were present at the table of the Western Pilgrim House, that he had no foreknowledge of the existence of the institution of guardianship, least of all that he was appointed as guardian, that the most he had expected was that perhaps, because he was the eldest grandson, Abdu'l-Baha might have left instructions as to how the Universal House of Justice was to be elected, and he might have been designated the one to see these were carried out and act as convener of the gatherings which would elect it." On the morning of 3rd January 1922, Shoghi Effendi visited the shrine of the Bab and the tomb of his grandfather. Later on that day, in the home of his aunt, but not in his presence, the Master's will and testament was read aloud to 9 men, most of them members of the family of Abdu'l-Baha, and its seals, signatures, and handwriting throughout, in his own hand, shown to them. On the 40th day, there was a memorial feast given to over 600 people of Haifa, Akka, and the surrounding parts of Palestine and Syria, people of various religions, races, and colors. More than 100 of the poor were also fed on this day. The government of Phoenicia, many other officials, and some Europeans were present. The feast was entirely arranged by members of the Master's household. The long tables were decorated with tailing branches of bougainvilleas. Its lovely purple blooms mingled with the white narcissus, and with the large dishes of golden oranges out of the beloved Master's garden, made a picture of loveliness in those spacious, lofty rooms, whose only other decoration was the gorgeous yet subdued coloring of rare Persian rugs. No useless, trivial ornaments marred the extreme dignity of simplicity. The guests received, each and all, the same welcome. There were no chief places. After the luncheon, the guests came into the large central hall. This also bare of ornament, save only for the portrait of him they had assembled to honor, and some antique Persian tapestry hung upon one wall. Before this was placed a platform from which the speeches were made to the rapt and silent throng, whose very hearts were listening. The public reading of Abdu'l-Baha's will was read on the 7th of January 1922 at his house in the presence of Baha'is from Persia, India, Egypt, England, Italy, Germany, America, and Japan. The gathering was not attended by the guardian, no doubt for reasons of ill health as much as delicacy on his part. On the adjoining rooms, the ladies and all the women of Abdu'l-Baha's household were gathered behind closed curtains with doors left ajar. The will and testament of Abdu'l-Baha was about to be read. 3 tablets written by the Master himself were brought to the gathering by one of Abdu'l-Baha's son-in-laws. In the presence of all gathered, these were given to Mirza Yusuf Khan Wajdani Hamadani to chant. He arose and with a sorrowful voice began to chant one of the tablets. The gathering was filled with sorrow. The chanting of the will and testament took place from morning till 1 p.m. Because Mirza Yusuf Khan was emotionally drained in the course of his reading, the remainder of the tablet was chanted by Agha Muhammad Taqi Isfahani, a merchant from Egypt. The final tablet was chanted by Mirza Yusuf Khan again. All the friends from Iran, Egypt, and the United States were crying pitifully. Everyone was overwhelmed with a sense of loss and profound grief. Fujita mentions that every time Shoghi Effendi's name would be mentioned, everybody arose in respect. The one who opposes him, Shoghi Effendi, and opposes them, the Universal House of Justice, verily he opposes God. The one who rebels against them, verily he rebels against God. The one who antagonizes them, antagonizes God. The one who disputes with them, disputes with God. The one who resists him, resists God. The one who denies him, denies God. The one who turns aside and withdraws from him, turns aside and withdraws and separates himself from God. Upon him be the wrath of God. Upon him be the anger of God. Upon him be the vengeance of God. On 16th January, the greatest holy leaf, and not Shoghi Effendi himself, announced to the Baha'i world the provisions of the Master's will. As the Master said after the ascension of Baha'u'llah, the light of the sun of truth will never set. The waves of the sea of truth will surge for all time. The divine rain of the kingdom of glory will never fail. Inspiration from the realm of the Supreme will not cease forevermore. Life-giving showers are constantly flowing from the clouds of mercy. Help is still being poured out from the heavenly land, and aid from the Supreme Lord is being given without ceasing. Though that glorious sun has set in the horizon of this world, it has risen in radiant splendor in the divine sky of celestial grandeur. The eyes of the people were veiled by his earthly body from seeing the light of the Sun of Truth. As that veil has been withdrawn, it is now the time to proclaim the word of God, to send forth the lightnings of the Spirit, to chant the melodies of faithfulness in the rose garden of God the Beloved. O nightingales of the garden of virtue, now is the day to sing the beautiful harmonies of heaven. Let your heart be no longer troubled, neither sit idle in sorrow and mourning, but arise, wing your flight into the celestial atmosphere, singing the triumphant hymns of holiness in the garden of love, always with your heart fixed on that divine home of the radiant Beloved, towards which we are all as pilgrims, making our pilgrimage. In this day of the spiritual springtime, if we do not arise in the glorious work of establishing unity of the kingdom, at what season should we choose to begin? Verily, now is the appointed time. These words apply equally to Abdu'l-Baha. The Times of India, in its issue of January 1922, opens one of its editorial articles as follows. It is not for us to judge whether the purity, the mysticism, the exalted ideas of Baha'ism will continue unchanged after the loss of the great leader, or to speculate on whether Baha'ism will someday become a force in the world as great or greater than Christianity or Islam. But we would pay a tribute to the memory of a man who yielded a vast influence for good, and who, if he was destined to see many of his ideas seemingly shattered in the World War, remained true to his convictions and to his beliefs in the possibility of a reign of peace and love, and who far more effectively than Tolstoy showed the West that religion is a vital force and can never be disregarded.